So you want to be a fighter? In this episode of the Prime People Podcast, I sit down with Mark Hominick, a world-class striker, UFC veteran, and we talk all things martial arts and how they've actually translated, and I've taken some of those tools and implemented to what we are building at Prime and how Mark uses them in his life. We talk about culture, we talk about team building, conditioning, being technical at what you do. So if you want to be the best at what you do, hit that subscribe and notification button and enjoy the show. The first thing I want to know about you is you're known unequivocally as like one of the top strikers on the planet in terms of like your technical aptitude. I want to go back to the very, very beginning. Sure. I've known you for over probably 20 years at this point. But even before that, who was Mark as like a little kid coming up?
Small town kid. I still live in the same small town. I definitely liked the rougher activities. Grew up kind of playing hockey, road hockey, wrestling with buddies. Everything you do in a small town. Yeah. So I didn't do any martial arts until I hit high school. So, it was just normal sports, but again, hockey was probably my mainstay. But I was very physical. He wasn't a big guy, but definitely involved, the hitting and the body checking and the roughhousing. Yeah. And, I loved WWF and martial arts movies. So I definitely had an interest in it, but I didn't really, there was no opportunities, even at that point. In Ontario, let alone a small town, right? Yeah. So there just wasn't an outlet for it. But yeah, definitely small town kid.
It's interesting because if you think of the history of martial arts, obviously Kung Fu came over, then there was karate, then Taekwondo, and a lot of those got commercialized. You came into kickboxing and industry that didn't exist at the time. What was your intro to MMA?
Well, it's funny. So my grade 9 gym class went to a local martial arts studio. Yeah. So we were just going for like a tour or trial week. Sure. And then I signed up that night. So I instantly fell in love with it. And then within 2 weeks I was competing. So definitely like I found my passion. Like I knew that this was the sport for me. This is what I've been kind of looking for all along. Yeah, so like I said, that night signed back, went right back after my first trial class and signed up. And 2 weeks later I'm on the mat competing.
The coach that you had initially that put you in competition within 2 weeks, tell me about that dynamic.
Yeah, obviously he's my first kind of mentor in the sport. He was involved in Taekwondo and then got into Jeet Kune Do, which is like Bruce Lee's martial arts. So he had the idea that he made his own martial arts system. It was called RICMAS, so Realistic Individual Combat Martial Arts System. So he kind of had the forefront of hey, let's put all these things together. Mm-hmm. So my first, I was kind of ahead of the game where my first introduction to martial arts wasn't, say, just a karate or just a kickboxing. I had, I got introduced to the jiu-jitsu, to the wrestling, to the striking. It wasn't the level of striking that I eventually learned, but I learned, punches and kicks as well as involving the grappling aspect. So I was ahead of the game in that way, is that my first introduction was a combination of the martial arts. So, and that's in 1998, so it was pretty early, in comparison, because even, in 2000, even to late 2000s, most people just had their one major strength, where, I did have a good understanding at 13 years old.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because say you look at the UFC where you spent some time in, and we'll get to that in a bit. That stage initially started as striker versus grappler and the sumo wrestler versus the American fighter and what that looked like. So you got introduced to multidisciplinary skill sets early on, but you got thrown into competition right away. Yep. How impactful do you think was that in terms of just jumping into the fire?
I think I always like that especially on the small level. Nowadays I feel that kids want to make it to the UFC before they cut their teeth, right? So but my level of competition was a regional tournament, right? So it's I did do it properly. That started at the very and I had years of that and gradually went up. And I think that just nowadays with this generation, I think that they want to be the CEO before they know how to mop the mats or sweep the floors at a business. So you do have to take your bumps along the road, and I did that on a small scale to start.
I think the bumps on the road are actually where the value is, right? The one reason I'm sitting here, obviously we have a long-time friendship and been part of this family for a long time, but more than that, I think what I wanted to translate to people watching and listening to this podcast is the discipline and the consistency that you've had over time is something that is very rare. Like above all talent and everything else, like I think watching over the years, even just you show up and pay attention to the little things. I want to get into how much of a technician you became, but I guess leading up to that, at what point in your martial arts journey did you realize how much effort needed to go into the technical aspects of fighting?
I think coming from losses, like when you see you get submitted or beaten in a certain area, like you just see there's such a small degree of error that they can lose from. And again, in this sport, there's so many skill set levels that you need to learn, right? Whether it's the strike and the grappling, so there's always a skill set,
conditioning,
exactly, right? And
right?
so I guess for myself, I had the striking was the next level. That's what I had the advantage of. So I just always had that as a perfection. That I'm always going to be able to finish the fight in that area. Yeah. So I just needed to fine tune it, and by doing that, I think working with the best. Like I always seek to find the best sparring or the best people to work with, to prove myself or gain the skills to get to that level.
That's interesting. So you recognize, obviously, just like everything else in life, you have all these different stats. If you're talking real estate, it's, well, how's your pricing? How's your marketing? What's your negotiation skills like? And like, it's funny you say that, like from your losses, I've left appointments where I'm like, this relationship's not going to work out, but I can improve on this, and this, and then bring it back to the well. And then finding the best people that you can to get around to learn from. So from that side of things, how did you find the right people?
Well, everything kind of changed. I felt when I was my first trainer, I was first started regional and then kind of provincial and then national level, and I was doing well and I was winning, but I did kind of see that the people or the group that I was training with, it was a small town, it was Ingersoll, Ontario. It was like, it's a town of 10,000 people. And, the level there, I wasn't going to get the training partners and coaching. When I met Sean Tompkins is when it all changed. And the best description would be, I felt that I was running on a treadmill as fast as I could. And then Sean kind of took me to the path and showed me the direction of where to go, because I was going full steam. I was putting in the maximum amount of effort. Yeah. I was working harder than anybody else, and I wanted it so bad, but I didn't really have someone to point me. Okay, this is the way to get to where you have the level and ability to be at. But again, I didn't have someone to kind of show me the path to get there.
What was the introduction to Sean? Like, how did you guys connect?
So I'd always heard he was actually a town over. He kind of had a bit of a reputation. Like he was a bit of a local icon type thing in kickboxing and karate. And I always heard of him. Yeah. And I was just one day showed up at his door. And then the same thing is my first night. He's like, if I'm making a decision, it's not, oh yeah, maybe doing it. Like it's, I'm not testing the water. Like I'm going head first, and that's it. Like I knew I need to seek him out. And same thing, he put me on the path to first in the kickboxing and building into the MMA and from there to the UFC. So without him leading the pathway, I wouldn't have made it there. I think I would have been still sprinting on that treadmill as fast as I could, putting maximum amount of effort, but not really going in any real direction, other than outworking anybody. Yeah,
and your nickname is The Machine. Where does that come from?
Just work ethic. There's no, like I'm just gonna. If you're beside me, I'm gonna work harder than you. And again, everyone always says that, but that's from my coaches. It's not from me giving myself a name. Like they just kind of seen that there's a difference between the amount of output and work ethic and commitment and discipline and dedication that I had, and that was it.
So a guy like Sean, when you get around somebody, like I've seeked out mentors far from this area because people weren't doing it how I wanted to do it here. And I noticed that they, from a third-party perspective, were able to see things in me I didn't see in myself. Was Sean able to do that with you? And I guess what were some of the unlocks that he found?
The one thing that Sean's leadership, I think that separated him from others is that he led by example. A lot of people, I feel in leadership position, they tell you, or they say, they don't do. Yeah. Sean always did. You know, he knew, like I knew, that he wanted the win or the accomplishment just as much or more than any of us, and he was making the same amount of sacrifice. Whether it's like, you know, traveling to California, to the Las Vegas to train, and sleeping in the gym on Thai pads as pillows, or folks mitts as pillows, to make sure we had the opportunity to go train at this place, or have the, you know, the training room we needed, or the opportunity to meet this promoter, or the opportunity to compete in this area, right? And he sacrificed his livelihood to make sure we had the opportunity to do so.
I think that kind of brings up the next point, and something I think is another reason why I came here is I think anybody who has kids or is even maybe struggling with a sense of purpose, a time in my life where I definitely needed it, I had found you guys. I had always been connected. Actually, Sean I knew before any of you guys because of the restaurants, and he was always coming in, and a bit of a local icon, right? I'd gone to the Hard Knocks gym first, and I remember being there, and then the transition to where the next gym was, and then this one. The transition from the garage one to last facility and then this one, I really saw that piece of where, like, I found a family in the discipline and being able to show up. And it didn't matter if you had lawyers in here, politicians, you had people that were unemployed or people that were on the come up or struggling with different things. When they would come here, there was a family environment, and having different people in different positions with different skill sets enabled people to feel safe and say, I am kind of like this guy. He's maybe a little bit different than me, but we all bring something different to the table. I think what you're explaining with Sean is him being the kind of glue that really brought a lot of that together, and then you guys kind of carrying on the legacy after. How important do you think it is to have culture and a good group of people around you in order for your business or yourself to thrive as a martial artist?
Well, same as what he's saying is like leading by example. Is the leader is going to create that culture, and people are going to fall in line with how they act, right? So again, if they're not following, you know, how they want the culture to be set, it's not going to you know, trickle down to the person next person beside you. And then one skill that Sean also had is he always made you feel special and part of that. You know, if you know, been at the early gyms, it was very raw. You know, so it's very intimidating. I used to come in the front door, but I always say that about even this gym, the hardest thing is to come in the front door. Once you get into the, you know, in past the first initial maybe intimidation, you see that it is a family. It is, you know, a group effort that puts in the work together. And you learn a lot about one another when we won't punch each other in the face. But but it is something special to be a part of, and you knew you were a part of that when you're in the doors.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see because there's people in different stages of life, right? Like I'm not going to be in the UFC anytime soon. I've had some health challenges too that put me in a position where I can't compete, but it doesn't mean you can't find a place within a family like a martial arts gym like this one. And I think people, I wish they had martial arts in like school, from literally primary to high school, and it blows my mind that they don't, because I've never met a bully that trained martial artists that ended up being a bully after the fact. So like, how do you think that component helped you kind of check the ego as you were coming up?
Yeah, like we kind of have a logo here too, is check your ego at the door. And it's pretty easy to do so once you get in here and you see that you know, see the levels of the guys, but also those guys probably are the most laid back, and you could have the confidence, but also they don't have the ego that goes with that, right? So I think that's a big thing, is just being humble, you know, and martial arts I think does that, and the whole it's based on tradition, is based on, you know, following your past mentors' instruction and how they carry themselves. So again, it goes back to the, you know, the leadership and leading by example.
Yeah, there's a lot to that, because I think checking your ego at the door, and like, there's always somebody bigger and badder out there. I've never been injured rolling with a black belt or training with somebody who's much at a higher level skill than I am. And I think you have to go and source those people, because they're not just going to show up. And what's interesting too that I noticed when it was very raw in the beginning, it was showing up consistently or implementing what you're being taught. Because like, you can teach somebody something all you want, but if they're not listening, they're not being respectful, they're not paying attention, or they're not going to, maybe they show up once every 6 months, they're not going to progress. And that mentor a lot of times is going to redirect those resources somewhere else, because if that person's not showing up, it's kind of a waste of time, right? So how important was that in your relationship?
Oh, that's just it. Like it is something, you know, the most people in here are in here every single day.
Yeah.
And, you know, and it is, again, it becomes part of your lifestyle and part of your, you know, day-to-day life. And when you miss a day, you're missing not just the physical aspect, you're missing the groupness, you know, the group think, the feeling of being a part of something special. And the culture is created around the people that are there every day, and it is a family.
Yeah, there's an output I find too. So like when I was going through my surgery, I was like watching other people that I roll with get better, and you always feel like I'm not in the gym, I'm not training. Like it's fun because it's competitive and they're friends, and I'm still chatting with them on the back end. But there is, I think, that output that just as a human you need in order to be balanced in other aspects of your life. Because I remember leaving, rolling at like the 11 o'clock class, going into negotiation at like 12:30, having somebody yell at me on the phone. It didn't faze me because I'm like, I was getting choked an hour ago. Like, what is this? So how much does that impact the other aspects of your life? Yeah,
Marshall, like I said, it builds the confidence in life because, again, it's pretty easy to be humbled in here. You know, someone you may look at and like, oh, that guy's not very physical, and all of a sudden they tie you in a knot. So, right, like you get humbled pretty quick that way, but it's also, you know, motivational that like, hey, I want to get better. And how did you do that, right? So, you know, picking everyone's brain and seeing how they achieve their greatness, I guess, in their level of ability.
You made another point, actually, as you said that. I thought about it because I was never naturally talented, but I would always ask questions. I'm a talker. So like I'd get rolled up and then be like, hey, like what led to that? And the guys would always take time and be like, this to this to this to this. So it's like, if you stop that doesn't happen, and then you don't end up in that position. I think you do have to actively source it and build those relationships in order to grow, right?
For sure. And like there are people on the mat that you know you'll kind of be drawn towards because you know you can maybe relate to them, or you can speak to them, or they can speak to you a little bit on the same language, right? So we also say there's almost like a weirdo magnet over the door, and there's so many individuals that make up, and I think that's a great thing. That you know, inside these doors, that there's so many personalities that make up this culture, but you're still under the same umbrella and same group.
And operating by like a base set of parameters, which I think our society is massively lacking today. You think of divisiveness between cultures, politics, beliefs, all these different things. And like I'm a Christian, I've rolled with atheists and people of every faith you can imagine, and they're my brothers. And I love them because like we've broken bread literally by rolling and getting after it together. And I think when I see places like that, I want to see more of it because people can get stuck in echo chambers, especially with lockdowns and everything else. From a mental health perspective, have you seen turnarounds in people from?
Oh yeah, for sure. Like, you know, and like I said, like you were saying earlier about kids being bullied, like this is a great place for both the kids maybe that are the bully as well as the person who's not, because it just brings people together. And we also make jokes that, like, you know, this place has cops and criminals, you know, but under the roof everyone gets along, and there's a unity on the mats that kind of, you know, you leave that ego at the door, and you're all friends. You know, like you put in the work obviously as well. It's not like you just come in and expect that, you know, everyone's going to go. You know, there's an understanding in a culture that, you know, is built within these doors, but, you know, everyone understands that the hard work is put in together.
And everybody's on a different path. So like I could come into the gym one day, see two people that I know are training for a fight. One guy that I know has one speed, and that's the only speed we're going to roll with. Another guy that's got a white belt and is like 100 pounds heavier than me. And I can assess in terms of like, okay, who my training partners are going to be for this session and what I'm trying to accomplish in my life. We had a conversation about what the next 6 months of my life look like. And I think that's something that you only comes with time versus when you came into the gym for the first time, or I came in the first time. It's like bull in a china shop, just do whatever. How important is it to get the right people as training partners? And
well, I mean, injury-wise, you'll learn that pretty quick. But again, like, not everyone's coming here to be a professional fighter, right? You also have day jobs and whatnot that you're leaving the door, but you still want to put in the hard work and feel that you are part of this culture, that it is a fight gym. I'm, you know, training with these guys. Hey, this guy's training for the UFC, and, you know, you are a part of it. Like, it's not like, hey, you're not a part of this person's journey, even though they might be trained to become a professional fighter, and you're become a banker. You know, like it's just like you're still putting in the same amount of work, and you have that mutual respect between each other. Sure. That you are maybe part of each other's journeys, because you may motivate the pro fighter just like the pro fighter may motivate you in your business life.
Yeah, and it goes outside of it, right? I think a lot of people have their day jobs, and if the pro fighter is a fighter, you make money fighting, but you become wealthy through the relationships that you make through fighting, where you talked about Sean and the promoters and everything else. I would even say through the business community, our relationship, it transcends a transactional business of, I'm coming here as a member, or I'm doing this, or I'm doing that. So if you called on me for a favor, it'd be a very different story than if it was just somebody I'd never talked to before. I think relationships are ultra key. And I've seen that over the years. And you mentioning somebody training for a fight, you being part of the story, makes me laugh, because I'm like, well, I've been a glorified grappling dummy for a few guys that were training in the past, but sometimes that's what they need. And sometimes they need the guy that's going to go 100%, that's at their skill level.
But again, like, and that like kind of goes back to some of the core values of martial arts, like respect and loyalty and discipline, right? Those are, again, those don't just, you can use that in every aspect of life, right? Those core values that, you know, the martial arts is kind of built on, you know, I think is going to make you a better human in general, whether it's in business, in life, in friendship, in how you conduct yourself as a family man. Like, you know, there's so many values that you're going to take from the martial arts that are going to help you in life.
Yeah,
you know, if you look at the core,
too, right?
the core values that it's all about, you know, hard work, discipline, like those are things that, you know, make the world a better place.
Definitely. And I think of what I've taken from martial arts and how I implement it into my business. I talk about this all the time. Like, when I run Prime, I genuinely want it to be very similar to a gym in terms of, I'm bringing together a whole bunch of athletes. Here's our training regimen. Here's the supporting equipment that we have. And we need to have a structure. We need to train regularly together. That market's going to shift. Things are going to change. Just like martial arts evolves, so does business. And that structure has really been a massive unlock for us. Let's get into the technical aspects of it, because you're an ultra technical fighter.
Yep.
I've seen fighters that are like, again, bull in a china shop, not technical at all. Where did you see that? And I guess, how do you think about striking from a technician standpoint?
I think the big, like, is being conditioned. Like, I think that's a big thing, is like being conditioned in your craft, because I think if you're not conditioned and prepared for the belt or whatever, like, everything goes out the window. So you could be the most technical striker in the world, but if you don't have the conditioning, it's not there. So I think that was always a big thing, is make sure that I was prepared. You know, it's like you prepare for victory, you prepare for defeat as well, right? If you don't put in the right amount of work. Is
that because the conditioning, like, you can be technical, but if you don't have the energy to be technical, your technical strikes will fall apart.
Exactly, right? Yep, exactly. You could have all the skills in the world, but if you don't put the practice and conditioning behind that, it's out the window.
Yeah,
right?
It's funny you say that, because, like, if I think of role playing with my team, a lot of people think we don't use scripts. I hate them. I don't like being sold.
Yes.
Right, but I do want to know, if I talk to 100 people, how do people want to be spoken to?
Yeah.
And the only way to figure that out is putting in the reps and practicing as a group and saying, like, okay, this is the value they want, so let's go get that information so that the next person I talk to, they have it. Getting technical is great. Let's talk about the conditioning piece first. What are your core beliefs when it comes to, like, how do you become a conditioned fighter?
Just outwork the person beside you. Yeah. Like, I was never, you know, looking behind me or looking beside me. I was always looking forward, right? So just, you know, I'd always, you know, just put in the reps, like you were saying, put in the conditioning, put in the multiple reps that nobody else was doing. And I think that's what separated me from other people. And I always went in, no matter what, if it was about, I always knew I was prepared. There wasn't in the back of my mind, wow, I should have done that. Or
is that road work, rounds?
Like everything. It's just like, just the preparation that, you know you have to put in. And it's not even, oh, I got it. Like, it's, okay, that's done. Like, it's. And
so is that physical exertion as well as, like, managing your diet and, like,
I'm a big person in documenting, like, you know, like, writing down exactly what I've done. So it's not like I'm not lying to myself. Like, you can see the reps that have been put in, and I was especially very young. I was very disciplined with that, like, documenting every last thing I did.
Interesting.
Yeah.
At what age did that start?
I was like 14, 15.
Okay.
You know, like,
Like weight you're putting on the bar, how many miles you ran, everything.
Like a day planner and documenting everything that was done in that day.
Yeah.
And I think that, because then again, you're not lying to yourself. There's nothing. Oh, I think I put in the work. Like no, you can see the data. That's what's been done. And if there was like a stone that wasn't unturned, you can see why, or where it wasn't, because it was documented along the way, or the road, it was well documented.
You got Leo counting your punches as you throw them?
no, just to myself. Like, the sport, you do have your coaches and everything, but it is an individual sport, and I think that's also put on you. Like, again, your coaches give you the direction and the technique and helping around, but again, it's on you to ensure that the work's done outside of that, right? Like, the working between at the time at the gym.
I think that's a great point, especially for the people watching and listening in terms of personal accountability. A lot of times people join a team being like, all right, when I get the cosign of ATC, or I'm at this gym, or I'm with this person, then I'll be all right, because everybody will see that I'm successful. I'm like, well, no. A lot of times you're the only one who knows what you're eating, how you're sleeping, the effort you're actually putting in. So documenting is a massive unlock in order to be able to grow. When you would look at your numbers, would you try and improve them every single week and be like, I put a little bit more weight on?
No, I just knew what I'd set out to do, and that was what was going to be done. It wasn't. I didn't have to question. I think I'm going to get all that. Like, if it's set. Like, if I set that goal, it was done. Like, that was, there wasn't any question that the work was going to be done. If this is what I'm going to do, that's what's done, right? So it wasn't. I didn't have to question myself. Like, I just
take the box.
Pardon me?
Tick the box.
Exactly.
And
like it's done.
Finished.
Yeah, like that's what needs to be done today. It's done. Like it's.
Well, how do you deal with adversity when you have a day off? Or like something doesn't work out great.
It like that's I guess maybe a bit of the OCD too is like change is tough for me.
Yeah.
Right, because like I'm so disciplined, militant in kind of my day and my thoughts. So so when things don't go my way, so maybe that something that I could probably do better with is that adapting to change.
Sure.
And everyone has some flaws, and that would definitely by doing that would be the one thing you'd have to be concerned about is what happens if it doesn't go well, right? Is knowing how to make some adapt and make some changes.
Yeah, I mean multiple times in my career I could tell you that stuff was going on in my life that I was like, I thought it was the biggest deal ever until I'm 5 years down the road, and I'm like, oh, that actually made me who I am today, because you're able to step back. But similar to you, I'm super rigid, very structured, to the point where like I had to get married to a woman to help me unlock some of that structure so I could be a better dad and husband. How have you matured as a person and, say, a fighter into being a dad? Because I know how important that is to you.
Yeah, I mean, it's a full-time job as well. And it always is a balance. How can you running your own business, running your own, own a property, having 2 kids, having a wife at home, and the schedule is not exactly 9 to 5. And, running your own shop, like, is not that. And, it is a bit of a balancing act, and sometimes like you had to learn on the fly. And like I said, sometimes that's maybe a weakness I have and need to work on. It is being able to adapt to change, right? Sure. Like it's not always going to be so set in a line, right? Because that's the way I was always. That's why I was very successful though. Is that it was very rigid. Like this is what has to happen. But with kids, sometimes they throw a little wrench in the road.
I get constantly surprised by my daughter every single day, but it kind of makes life fun too, right? It kind of shakes you up, but then makes you appreciate, I think, the structure at the same time.
For sure.
Because there is a balance to it. In terms of adapting to the landscape of owning a business, dealing with the lockdowns, you guys pivoted, made changes very, very quickly.
Yeah.
Like you were very fluid. What's the landscape of owning a fitness gym today? What would you tell people watching about what it's like to interact with this gym?
It's a bit of finding, I guess, the ownership of, because we own the building as well as the gym, right? So finding the balance between both of those has been a bit of a learning curve.
Sure.
Just adapting to change, because definitely the one thing that we've always had is our name and reputation in the city, and in the recent years. Definitely more competition coming to the city is having to change and add new things that we probably didn't have to have in the past, because we were the mainstay, and I think we've done a good job at that. Is kind of seeing the direction that the landscape is in right now and adapting along the way, just like with Like doing online classes was not exactly our forte, because the strength we had always is the environment that we created and being in this environment. And again, if your business is,
I still have the virtual videos that were popping up when you were doing the classes.
Ridiculous.
But it's like it was keeping the community somewhat together.
But that's just it. Like how do you adapt to have like people come here for the environment, and when you're trying to keep the business going but not having the physical environment. Right, like so you
need the human connection, like the belly to belly stuff. Even the time that with my surgery I took off, and to me it's always been something I wanted to keep in touch. But like being physically here is a different feeling than just talking over text message or jumping on a phone call to talk about stuff.
Yeah, right? And that's it. Like even like showing a video of the gym, like you have to be part of the, and like you're going back to talking about the culture, and that's one thing I think we've done a good job of creating is being a part of that family, being part of that culture, and not being able to have that during COVID was definitely tough, but again, we adapted as best we could to make it through that.
Yeah, and I think moving forward too, I like your focus on the family kind of environment, because I think that's the core of what these places are. I think a lot of people, maybe they want to come because they want to learn to defend themselves. Maybe they want to come because they want something for their kid to do where they can develop some self-confidence. And I think all of these things, I would encourage people, I can't say it enough times, to bring their kids and get them in some sort of structured martial arts, because I think it's one of the single biggest unlocks to making that person feel a sense of purpose and completeness in other aspects of their life. And I think it definitely balances them out. But I think wearing many hats as a father, as a business owner, as a building owner, running the actual business, moving into a coaching role, I definitely have a ton of respect for how you're trying to compartmentalize those and be technical in your approach to each of those, while still trying to be fluid, because you got to respond to the market and what people want. It changes every single day, especially when it comes to, say, mixed martial arts, which is on the world stage now. There's multiple different shows now that are all over the world doing different things. And what's your perspective, having been in it when it was underground to today? I'd love to get your thoughts
like
on that.
I always love the rawness, and again, I think the biggest difference, the era that I kind of came up in, I think we fought because we were fighters, and we wanted to compete in fighting and in martial arts. Where now, with it being the Conor McGregors and it being on the global stage, young kids may choose, hey, I want to be a professional MMA fighter.
Because I get the followers on TikTok.
As opposed to like, I got into martial arts and started competing because I love the one-on-one competition, and not because I wanted to be famous. And fighting.
Dude, real estate's the same thing, dude. Like the last 2 years, I have agents that are like, I want to be famous on TikTok. Look at all these real estate agents. It's the exact same thing. And they're getting washed out now because the interest rate changes. Because they don't have the base skills that a martial artist has that they're not applying to their craft.
And that's just it. Like I guess my era, like you knew that most of us were real fighters. Like you were a competitor in martial arts and in fighting, and this is what you chose. Now you didn't like, hey, I'm going to try this and want to be a fighter, right? So all of a sudden Mike Tyson has a great quote is that things change when you get punched in the mouth, right? So like it's like just all of a sudden it got real. So we put in the reps, like we were talking before, is years of reps before we made to that, where people may come in the door and they want to fight next week, and when they don't understand that.
What does that mean?
Yeah, exactly. The years of reps in like anything, like you have to put in the reps to become successful in anything.
100%. And it's funny because when I came in the very beginning, when I was in the hospitality industry, I was a scared kid, got bullied when I was super young. And I think I was attracted to gyms like this because I'm like, I'm going to be a tough guy. I'm going to be a fighter. I know I'm not a fighter like you would be from the standpoint, but I know that I can play a supporting role within a community of being a sheepdog or a shepherd to help other people feel like they can enter an environment like this in a way that maybe they wouldn't feel otherwise. Like you said, like being able to talk to somebody at their level, even with some of the stuff I dealt with in my past when it came to addictions and everything else, despite the fact that I look like a buttoned up businessman now. I can make them feel a little bit different than somebody that maybe hasn't been through that. And I think that's a key lesson too, of like, the label doesn't define you as who you are. Like when you become a fighter, all the success isn't necessarily going to show up. But if you are a fighter and you find out that's who you are, amazing. Because the closer you are to that person, the more you can be yourself, the more that people around you can fall in line to like where they fit within your ecosystem. And it's not that the fighter's better than the business person or the business person's better than the fighter. It's like, how does the community support itself with a collective ecosystem and a family like we talked about, that all shapes, sizes, races, religions, right? Which is the world that we seem to be striving for, but it doesn't look like it when you read the news.
No, and that's one thing we were very proud of, is that we have created that environment that, you know, a kid or you know, a woman coming in on her first day for self-defense, you know, they feel part of this community, and that's the environment that we've always strived to put you know, under this roof.
Yeah, and you've done a great job doing that. I definitely want to encourage everybody to check out ATC, Adrenaline Fitness, in London, Ontario. I have sent this on I don't know how many Instagram videos and stories. The world-class level of training that you have at this facility is one of the biggest underrated things in all of Southwestern Ontario. And you can literally walk in the door and talk to them just like a normal person and feel like you're part of the family. So if you're sourcing something, I'd say it's definitely worth the drive. If you're local, it's definitely worth checking them out. And Mark, definitely not the last episode of the conversation we're going to have.
Perfect.
All right, thanks, brother.